everybody, welcome to another author event with Braille House and Bookshop 507. Today we are joined by a fantastic author, Maggie Christensen. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Andrew.
A pleasure. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from Scotland. I came here in my mid-20s, actually 50 years ago this year,
Wow.
to teach primary school for 2 years, and here I still am. I moved into teacher education where I met my lovely husband. I was lured by ads that the Australian Education Authority put on at the time. I'm showing a man on a beach wearing a gown and a cap and not much else, some budgie smugglers saying, "Come and teach in the sun."
Okay.
So here I am. I write books about older characters. My characters are all in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I say they're heartwarming stories of second chances. And hopefully people can relate to them.
Yeah, nice one. And as you mentioned, you spent most of your career as a teacher, but you say you've always had an interest in writing. So what inspired that leap for the first book?
Well, when I was getting close to retirement, I decided I wasn't going to sit around doing nothing. I could write the books that I'd always wanted to write. So I started writing. I actually took an online course on creative writing. And it was more about writing short stories, and I don't like reading short stories, so I didn't like writing them. So I decided to write a novel, and I looked for a writing group that I could relate to. And after a few false starts, I found a writing group, and the Inkies know who they are. And a few of them had published books, and they encouraged me to publish what I was writing. So I did.
Fantastic. And can you tell us a bit more? You've got the Granite Springs series of books. Is that the latest series?
It is. That's the series I'm currently writing.
Oh, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, previous to this, I've always written about places I know, real places. But I decided that I would, there was a lot of interest in rural stories and rural romance. So I thought I'd write a story in a hypothetical Australian country town. I've lived in a couple of country towns, so it was loosely based on where I've lived. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't think of a name for it. I knew I needed a name that sort of resonated with me and other people. And my husband and I were driving up through the north coast of Queensland a couple of years ago, and we passed a property, and the name on the gate said Granite Springs. And I thought, that's the name of my country town. So it's set in this fictional country town in New South Wales, within reach of Canberra. And I like books where you meet old friends in books. So I decided that each of the books would be standalone, but the characters would continue through. Some of the characters would continue throughout the books, and particularly the couple in the first book keep reappearing in the other books. The house where Joe lives is based on the house that we lived on 20 acres, and we had goats and horses. So some of my characters have goats and some of my characters have horses. And I really enjoy writing these books. They seem to have taken off, which surprises me, but they're fun.
Nice one. And where do you get your inspiration from? If it can come off a sign on the side of the road, where do you get the most inspiration from?
Well, things I see and things I hear. My very first book, Band of Gold, I heard was based on a story, two stories I heard actually. One about a woman whose husband put his wedding ring on the table on Christmas Day and said, "I don't want to be married anymore." And two stories. One did that, and then the other one, it happened on Christmas Day. So I put those together, and that's the beginning of that book. Another book, Champagne for Breakfast, which is set here on the Sunshine Coast where I live. My husband and I were walking along the river in Noosa one Sunday morning, and we saw this woman sitting there by herself with an empty wine bottle. And I thought, there's got to be a story in that. So Champagne for Breakfast starts with a woman on her 50th birthday finishing a bottle of champagne by herself on the river at Noosa.
Nice.
Another book, The Good Sister, was actually based on my aunt's story. It's my only historical novel. And when I was a child, my aunt told me stories of her ill-fated romance. And she bored us silly with it, but I thought I've got to write that story at some stage. And that's her story. So ideas are everywhere, really.
Yeah, right. And you've written so many books. What's the hardest thing about creating new stories?
I'm not sure, Andrew. As I'm writing one book, I get ideas for a character in another book. So I start with a character and an idea. Although one author once told me, you don't need one idea, you need 3 ideas. So I start with the one idea, a situation that my character is in, and then figure out what happens to that character as it goes along. As I say, when I'm writing one, another idea is sort of hitting my, in my head for the next book. And I write by the seat of my pants. As I said to someone the other day, my books grow like Topsy. I don't do any planning, and I really don't know what's going to happen next. Sometimes I'll sit down to a blank page and say to my husband, who I share an office with, I don't know what's going to happen next. And then I'll say, gosh, I've written 1,000 words. I didn't know what I was going to write. So they just come.
Exciting, though.
It is.
Yeah. And do you find different stories easier to write than others?
I think my contemporary stories are easier to write, but that said, sometimes I can get stuck in the middle of a book. Sometimes I get stuck at the end. Sometimes I'll take ages to write the beginning. I found my historical book was the hardest to write. It's a dual time frame, and I vowed never to write another historical novel. But that said, I do have an idea for another one that keeps bugging me, so maybe I will one day.
Nice. And what's the best advice you've been given as an author?
I think just to write every day. I went to hear Michael Connolly talk a couple of years ago, and I found him fascinating. I love his books. And he said, write every day, even if it's only a few lines, a chapter or a page, but write something. And I thought that was extremely good advice.
Yeah, nice. And you've had great success. Sorry?
I was going to say, I guess also to get a good editor and get a good designer. And I've been fortunate in that.
Yeah, right. And how do you choose the editors and designers? Are they chosen? Was it hard to find them, or did you just go to the publisher and they connected you?
But I self-published, so I was lucky enough to be able to choose my own, which is wonderful because I'm a bit of a control freak. With the editor, I asked around and got people to recommend editors, and then I had 3 editors do a sample edit for me, and I would recommend that to any new writer. And I didn't choose the cheapest one, and I didn't choose the dearest one, but I chose Johnny, who gave me the best advice. I think his comments were brilliant, and I've used him for all the time I've been writing. I've used him in every book, and he's an amazing guy. He lives in England, so we communicate purely by email at different times. Sometimes we're actually in the same time frame, which is wonderful. But he is able to remember my books, so he remembers the characters from the first book I wrote. So if I put a character in, he'll remember it, and his comments are always so wonderful.
Nice.
Before I chose him, I actually looked at some books that he'd edited as well, and I found that useful. And then I found books that I liked the look of the covers, and I looked up who the cover designers were for those books. And again, I found Jane, she's also in England, and I think she's a brilliant cover designer. So many people have commented on my covers.
Yeah, they are beautiful. So you've had a lot of success with your books. What has surprised you the most about that success?
I guess just the fact that people want to read what I write. But one of the things that really amazes me is that how people say that my books resonate with them, and that they can relate so much to the characters and the situations I put my characters in.
Yeah.
And I find that very touching and rewarding.
Yeah. Do you think that it's because that really involves the reader if they feel like they know the characters?
Yeah.
Is that a difficult talent to master, or?
I don't deliberately try to do that. It just seems to happen.
Yeah, right.
It's strange. And people have come up to me and said, oh, that happened to me, or that happened to a friend of mine. And I'm very touched by that. Yeah.
And the countryside in your books is amazing. Do places inspire you?
They do. I tend to write about places I know. So even the fictional ones are based, as I said earlier, are based on places I know. So I've written books set in Sydney, where I lived when I first came to Australia, Scotland, where I come from, although I find Glasgow, where I wrote about, is very different now from what it was when I was there. And I'm fortunate that I have relatives who still live there who can keep me on the right track.
No.
And as I said, the Granite Springs one is based loosely on places I lived in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the Sunshine Coast ones, which are based on where I live now, which is easy.
Yeah, and you have one based on a trip to Oregon as well.
Oh yes, sorry, I should mention that. Yeah, my mother-in-law, my husband comes from the States, and he found his later teenage years in California. So my mother-in-law lived in California, and then in her 80s she moved to Oregon, to the little town of Florence in Oregon, and we visited her there very often. So my Oregon ones are set in Florence, which is a lovely town on the coast in Oregon. I love these books, and I might even write another one set in Oregon because it's to write.
Yeah, right, beautiful. And what types of books do you like to read yourself? What's on the bedside table?
I like women's fiction, obviously family dramas, and I also like crime. So my favourite authors, I'd say, would be Marcia Willett, an English author, Joanna Trollope, who's an English author, and then I mentioned Michael Connelly earlier. I've just finished Silver by Chris Hammer, which I loved, and I'm currently reading, what's her name? Carolyn Beecher's latest book, Finding Edie.
Yeah.
Quite eclectic in my reading.
Yeah, nice one. And if you were to give some advice to a first-time author or somebody, lots of people write, but not many people take that next step, what would your advice be?
Finish that book that's sitting there, because so many people are writing a book for years and years. So write every day, finish that book, find a good editor and designer, and just get it, bite the bullet and get it out there.
Nice. Good advice. And what's next? What's coming up for you? Do you have any exciting news to tell us?
Well, I have 2 books on pre-order at the moment. My next book in the Granite Springs series, The Life She Imagines, will be released on the 21st of this month.
Oh, nice.
And it's Marie's story. So people who've read the earlier books will be familiar with the Bean Sprout Cafe. And Marie is one of the partners in the Bean Sprout Cafe, so it's her story. Mm-hmm. And then I have a Christmas book coming out. It's my first ever Christmas book. And again, people who have read the series will be familiar with Magda, who's an older lady. She's in her 70s. And is a masseur. And I was asked at a book signing once, why don't you write books about people in their 70s? So I decided that my Christmas story will be Magda's story, and it will be released at the end of October. And it's a novella, so it's a shorter one.
Yeah, you've got a busy season coming up.
I have. Yeah, I'm writing another Granite Springs one, which will be out next year, but I'm just about halfway through it.
Mm. And is that usually the case, 2 or 3 on the go?
Yeah, I usually find that I'm writing one book, editing another one, and marketing another one. So it's busy.
Yeah, it sounds busy. And are you able to read us some of your work?
I can read you the prologue from the first book in the Granite Springs series.
Great.
Joanna Slater knew the bedside vigil was nearing its inevitable end. Her best friend Alice had managed to survive through Christmas, but the doctors weren't hopeful she'd live to see January out. The cancer she'd been battling for the past 3 years was finally winning. Now Jo sat with Alice's husband Call, one each side of the bed, watching, waiting. The overhead fan only managing to move the already hot air around and doing little to cool the room. Jo saw Alice's lips move and moved closer to hear her friend's words. You'll look out for Call, won't you, Jo? Her thin hand grasped Jo's. Don't let him grieve too much. Make sure he... But she was too weak to continue. Of course, dear Alice, Jo whispered. Hush now. I'll always be here. She squeezed her friend's hand and watched as Alice's eyes slowly closed. Jo's eyes misted and she turned away as Cole's fingers moved down Alice's cheek and he leant over to kiss her. She stood up, walking to the window to gaze unseeingly out at the garden, which, starved of both water and Alice's ministrations, was now dry and unkempt. The small Australian country town of Granite Springs had turned into a ghost town. It was that time of year when the few families still in town headed for the local swimming pool or the river. Most had set off right after Christmas for the coast, preferring to see out the worst of the summer heat on the beach, where there were at least a chance of a cool breeze from the ocean. Jo was seized with a feeling of desolation, one she'd already had to deal with. And now, without Alice, how would she cope? She heard a gasp behind her, and turning quickly, saw Cole knuckling his eyes. She's gone. Oh no, Cole. Jo moved to lay a hand on his shoulder, unable to stop her tears. I know it's a blessing, but tears streamed unchecked down his cheeks. What am I going to do without her? These past 3 years. He rose and the two clasped each other in grief, friends sharing their anguish. Jo remembered the good times, the years they'd been a foursome before Alice's illness and Jo's husband's defection. Now there were only the two of them left.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you so much for that.
I like to try and grab my readers in the first part.
Yeah, you had me. I want to find out what happens as well. Yeah. So where can people purchase your books or find out more about yourself?
Okay, they can purchase the digital copies on Amazon. They can purchase paperbacks on any of the online stores, Amazon, Book Depository, Booktopia, Fish Pond. Or if they're in Australia, they can purchase signed copies directly from my website.
Beautiful. And what is that?
MaggieChristensenAuthor.com.
And so thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing to come behind the pages and hear more about your story and your writing process. Do you have any parting messages for the people watching?
Keep reading, and if you're a reader, write reviews for the books you read, because authors really value reviews. They're really important to them.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Maggie, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, and thank you for a great interview, Andrew.
A pleasure. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.